All right, so today we're diving deep into the world of Lalla, this 14th century Kashmiri mystic poet.
Oh, this is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, you gave us a ton of great sources, scholarly excerpts, some historical accounts.
Even some of her actual poems, her Vox.
Right, which is incredible. I mean, just from glancing at this stuff, it seems like she was blending Hinduism and Tantra.
Even some connections to Sufism.
Talk about a unique mix.
Yeah, I think what's really amazing about Lalla is how her poetry, how these Vox, they've really echoed across centuries, across spiritual traditions.
Yeah.
I mean, her message, it's all about self-discovery, pushing past limitations, and it still speaks to people today, you know?
It's wild to think about that she lived like over 700 years ago.
I know.
And she's still relevant.
Yeah.
It seems like she was a real trailblazer. I mean, from what I'm seeing here, she renounces everything to seek enlightenment.
Yeah.
Especially as a woman in 14th century Kashmir. I mean, that must have been a radical move.
Oh, definitely imagine Kashmir back then. I mean, it was steeped in tradition, strict social rules. And there's this sociologist, T.N. Madan, who studied the region, and he wrote about how people were deeply suspicious of anyone who renounced worldly life, especially if they were from the Brahmin caste.
Like Lalla.
Like Lalla, exactly, because they were expected to be these pillars of society.
They're supposed to be upholding the traditions.
Yeah, the whole picture.
Right, but she breaks that mold completely.
Completely.
So you mentioned she was a Brahmin. For those of us who might need a refresher, what does that even mean?
Oh, yeah, good point. Think of it like the top tier of the Hindu caste system.
Okay.
So Brahmins, they were the priests, scholars, the keepers of knowledge. They were supposed to uphold all of the traditions, get married, have families, that whole picture. So when Lalla walks away from all of that at age 26, it's a huge deal.
26, wow.
Yeah.
Makes her even cooler somehow.
Right.
So she breaks free from all these expectations, but what even leads her to this life of poetry and spiritual searching?
Yeah.
The sources you gave mention an unhappy marriage.
Right. Yeah, the traditional story, and it is important to note that this comes from centuries later.
Okay.
But the traditional story is that she was in a terrible marriage. Her husband and her mother-in-law, they just didn't understand her yearning for something deeper.
Right.
Her spiritual leanings. There's even a saying that's attributed to her, whether they kill a ram or a sheep, Lalla will get a stone to eat. Things were rough.
Yeah, that paints a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah.
I mean, that saying really captures that feeling of being misunderstood, being the odd one out.
Totally.
So she leaves all this behind, becomes this wandering mystic composing poems, and that's where her real voice comes through, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
But I think before we even dive into the poetry itself, we have to acknowledge this mystery surrounding Lalla's actual life.
Right.
I mean, there are no contemporary accounts, just these legends that popped up centuries after she lived. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
That's what makes it so intriguing, though, right? This air of mystery just adds to her legend. And it's amazing that despite this lack of solid info, her poems have been passed down through generations, purely through oral tradition.
Yeah, it really says something about their impact. Her work has this staying power because it was kept alive by the people, you know, through storytelling and song. But to even understand her poetry, I think it's helpful to try and sketch out like a basic picture of her life.
Right.
Piecing together those puzzle fragments, so to speak.
Right. Give us like the Spark Notes version. What's the traditional narrative, even if we have to take it with a grain of salt?
Okay, so the story goes like this. Lalla, she's born into a Brahmin family. She's married young, as was the custom.
Right.
But the marriage was incredibly unhappy.
Yeah.
It's said that her in-laws, they mocked her spiritual inclinations. And then at 26, she takes this incredibly bold step. She renounces her worldly life and sets out to find enlightenment.
Wow.
She becomes a student of this renowned Shaiva Saint Said Boyu. And after her training, she embraces the life of a wandering mendicant, composing these incredibly powerful poems that challenge everything people thought they knew about society and spirituality.
Okay, so the Said Boyu guy, what tradition did he represent? You mentioned Kashmir Shaivism earlier.
Right. Said Boyu, he was a master of Kashmir Shaivism.
Okay.
So imagine the world is like a giant movie screen, right? Kashmir Shaivism says we're all part of the same movie, but we get so caught up in our individual roles that we forget we're all all part of this one divine source, Shiva. And Lalla was drawn to that idea, this unity beneath the surface of things.
It makes sense, especially coming from a society where everything was so divided by caste and social roles. Like she's saying, look deeper. There's something more fundamental connecting us all. But her poems aren't just about Shaivism, right?
Yeah.
There's this whole blend of Tantra yoga and even whispers of Sufism.
That's what makes her so fascinating.
Yeah.
She's taking all these different spiritual traditions, Kashmir Shaivism, Tantra yoga, and she's blending them into this really unique brew.
It's like her own special blend.
Yeah.
And you're right, there are hints of Sufi influence too, which is incredible considering that Sufism comes from the Islamic tradition.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Okay, so Tantra, that word gets thrown around a lot.
I know.
But honestly, I think most people have the wrong idea about it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What's the real deal with Tantra?
You're right. It's often misunderstood.
Yeah.
It's not just about sexuality, although that can be a part of it.
Okay.
Think of it more like using practices that might seem forbidden or taboo to shatter the limits we place on our minds. It's about pushing past your comfort zone to reach a different level of consciousness.
That's really interesting. So it's about pushing boundaries not just in society, but in your own mind.
Exactly.
Which makes me think about how Lalla renounced her whole life. Was that kind of a tantric act in itself? Like this deliberate breaking from what was expected of her?
That's a really insightful connection. And it gets to the heart of why Lalla's poems are so powerful. She's not just talking about these abstract concepts. She's living them.
Right.
She's embodying this idea of breaking free of challenging limitations on every level.
So how does yoga fit into all of this?
Well, yoga, as you likely know, is all about techniques for controlling your body and breath to tap into a deeper awareness.
Okay.
And when you look at Lalla's poems, you'll see she uses a lot of that same imagery, breath energy, the body as a vessel for spiritual experience.
Right.
It suggests that she may have drawn from yogic practices in her own journey.
Okay, starting to see the connections here, but let's be honest. Some of the stuff you gave me about Lalla's poetry is downright scandalous.
Oh, yeah.
There's talk of wine meat breaking rules, stuff that would make even a modern audience blush. What is going on there?
Yes, let's unpack the Tantric underground.
Ooh, that sounds even more scandalous. Tell me more.
Okay. It's not like some secret society, with robes and rituals. Oh, that would make a great movie.
It would.
But it's more about a network of people who are exploring these unconventional spiritual practices that were pushing boundaries, challenging social norms, and searching for this radical personal transformation.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about like hedonism or breaking rules for the sake of it.
Right.
These practices often had a really deep symbolic meaning.
Okay.
That was aimed at reaching a higher state of consciousness.
So it's less about the outward actions and more about the internal shift.
Exactly. For example, there's this practice called the chakra sacrifice that some tantric traditions used.
Okay.
We won't go into graphic detail here.
Associate that.
But it involved pushing past these physical and mental comfort zones to access like a deeper truth.
Wow.
It's about transcending limitations, not just indulging in pleasure.
Okay, so how does this all connect back to Lalla and her poems?
She was a master of symbolism and metaphor.
Okay.
What might seem shocking on the surface, like those verses about wine and meat, often has a deeper spiritual meaning. It's like she's using those images to kind of jolt us awake.
Right.
To shake us out of our ordinary way of seeing the world.
So when she talks about wine, it's not about getting drunk.
Right.
It's about experiencing a different kind of intoxication.
Exactly, a spiritual one.
A spiritual one. Okay, I like that.
And this is where understanding the Tantric underground really helps us understand Lalla's work.
Right.
She was writing in a context where people were open to these unconventional ideas and practices.
It makes a lot of sense. It's like she was speaking the language of her time, using images and metaphors that her audience would have understood on a deeper level.
Totally.
Okay, but here's something else that I found really interesting in the research you provided, this idea that what we call Lalla's poetry might actually be a collection of works by multiple authors.
Yeah.
That kind of blew my mind.
That's a question that scholars have been debating for years.
Is it even possible that we've been attributing all these poems to a single person when they might actually be a composite work?
Yeah. I mean, some scholars are adamant about maintaining a pure Lalla.
Okay.
Wanting to remove any poems that seem like they were added later.
Right.
But pinpointing what's original and what isn't is incredibly difficult, especially given the lack of historical records.
Right. So how do we even begin to unravel that knot?
Well, I find this idea of a contributory lineage to be a more compelling way to look at it.
Okay.
Imagine it like this over centuries. People added to, adapted, and reinterpreted Lalla's poems.
Okay.
keeping them alive and relevant to their own times.
So instead of a single author, it's more like a community effort.
Right.
With each generation adding its own layer of meaning to the poem.
Exactly. It becomes this living tradition constantly evolving and being reshaped.
I like that analogy.
It's like a river flowing through time and picking up new currents and sediments along the way.
Yeah, it explains why some of her poems feel so different from each other, why there's such a range of styles and vocabulary.
Right. It's not a static text.
It's a living, breathing thing.
It's a dynamic living body of work. And that makes the question of authorship even more intriguing. I mean, who can we truly say authored Lalla's poems?
Right.
The historical Lalla, the woman who lived in 14th century Kashmir.
Right.
Or is it the collective consciousness of all the people who have carried her words forward through the generations?
Wow.
Adding their own insights and experiences to the mix.
That's a big question, and it makes me wonder if these poems have been so fluid, so open to interpretation. What are some of the core themes that run through them? What are the recurring ideas that have resonated with people across centuries and cultures?
Well, despite this fluidity, there are definitely some core ideas that consistently shine through, this longing for the divine, this breaking free from the limitations of the ego, finding truth within.
Right.
These are universal themes that speak to the human condition itself.
It makes sense. No matter what our individual beliefs or backgrounds are, we all share those fundamental desires for connection, meaning transcendence.
Right.
And Lalla's poems tap into that shared yearning.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't shy away from the complexities of that journey. She talks about the struggles, the doubts, the moments of darkness that we all inevitably face on the path towards enlightenment.
She's not afraid to get real.
Right.
To show us that spiritual growth isn't always pretty or comfortable.
Exactly. And that's what makes her so relatable.
Yeah.
She's not presenting herself as this perfect guru on a pedestal.
Yeah.
She's sharing her own struggles,
Yeah.
her own doubts, and inviting us to join her on this journey of self-discovery.
So it's less about rigid dogma and more about a personal exploration, a joyful discovery of the divine within and all around us.
Yeah.
Okay, but getting back to her language and those sources you provided, there's a lot of talk about how Lalla draws from this yogic imagery. And it's not just about the poses, but about breath energy, the body as a vessel for spiritual experience.
Right.
How does that play out in her poems?
Her poems are deeply embodied.
Yeah.
She's not trying to escape the physical world or deny our human desires and emotions.
Right.
In fact, she embraces those things, using them as fuel for her spiritual journey.
That's something that really stands out in the poems you shared. There's this rawness of vulnerability that you don't often see in religious poetry. It's like she's not afraid to show us her humanity, her flaws, her struggles.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what makes her so compelling. She's not presenting this idealized version of enlightenment.
Yeah.
She's showing us that the path can be messy, it can be challenging, and it requires us to confront our shadows.
It's like she's saying, look, I'm not perfect. I'm still working on this whole enlightenment thing, but here's what I've learned so far.
Yeah, you got it. And that makes her incredibly relatable.
So how does her use of yogic imagery contribute to this sense of embodiment?
Remember, yoga is all about mastering the body and breath to access the deeper state of awareness.
Right.
And Lalla uses those same elements, breath, energy, physical sensations, to describe her own spiritual experience.
Right.
It's like she's taking these ancient techniques and making them relevant to a wider audience, using the language of everyday life to explain these profound concepts.
It's like she's demystifying yoga and Tantra, showing us that these practices aren't just for ascetics or gurus.
Yeah.
They're for everyone.
Precisely. And she's doing it in a way that's both profound and accessible. It's like she's saying, hey, liberation isn't this abstract concept that's out of reach.
Right.
It's right here within you. You just have to know how to tap into it.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about Hinduism and Tantra.
Right.
But you also mentioned that Lalla's work has connections to Sufism, which is fascinating because that's a mystical branch of Islam. How does she bridge those two seemingly disparate traditions?
It really speaks to the universality of her message.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about the rishis, that Sufi order that incorporated elements of Hindu asceticism into their practices?
Right.
Well, that shows you how fluid those boundaries could be in Kashmir. Lalla's poetry wasn't confined by religious dogma or sectarian divisions. It spoke to a deeper truth that resonated with people from diverse backgrounds.
It's like she was tapping into a wellspring of wisdom that's beyond any specific religion or belief system, a truth that speaks to the heart of what it means to be human.
Exactly. And that's what makes her so relevant today in a world that's so often divided by religious and cultural differences. Lalla's message offers a powerful reminder of our shared humanity.
Yeah, it's like she's saying, look, we might have different beliefs, different practices, but ultimately we're all seeking the same thing.
Right.
Love, connection, meaning, and that sense of belonging to something greater than ourselves.
Beautifully said. And that brings us to a really interesting question. How did Lalla's message manage to cut through the political and religious turmoil of her time?
Right.
And achieve this kind of enduring influence? I mean, remember, she lived during a period of intense upheaval.
Yeah.
With invasions, regime changes, and religious conversions happening all around her.
It was a chaotic time. It makes you wonder how anyone could find peace or clarity amidst all that noise and upheaval.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
It is.
And it speaks to the power of her message, its ability to transcend external circumstances and offer a refuge of inner peace.
It's like in the midst of all that chaos, she created this space of stillness, a sanctuary of the soul where people could find refuge from the storms raging outside.
That's a beautiful image. And maybe that's the key to understanding Lalla's enduring appeal. She didn't try to change the world around her. She focused on changing the world within. And by doing so, she created this ripple effect that extended far beyond her own lifetime, influencing spiritual seekers and social reformers for centuries to come.
So her inner transformation became a catalyst for outer transformation, inspiring others to seek that same level of peace and liberation.
Precisely. And that brings us to another important point about Lalla's legacy, her role as a social reformer.
Okay.
While she wasn't directly involved in politics or activism, her message of equality and spiritual unity had profound social implications. It challenged the rigid caste system and patriarchal norms of her time.
So powerful just by living her truth.
Yeah.
By defying expectations and embracing a path that was considered unconventional, especially for a woman, she was making a statement.
You're absolutely right. Lalla's very existence was a form of social activism.
Wow.
She embodied a different way of being in the world, a way of relating to others that transcended those limiting social constructs.
It's like she was saying, hey, I don't need your labels. I don't need your approval. I'm defining my own path based on my own inner compass.
And that message resonated with people who were also yearning for freedom,
Right.
for liberation from those oppressive social norms. It's like she gave them permission to question, to break free, and to embrace their own unique paths.
That makes her an incredibly important figure in Kashmiri history.
Yeah.
She wasn't just a spiritual teacher, but a social pioneer, a symbol of resistance against those forces that sought to control and confine people's lives.
Exactly, and it's a message that continues to resonate today.
Right.
In a world where so many people are still struggling for equality, for the right to live authentically, and for the freedom to define their own paths.
It's inspiring to think that Lalla's message of freedom and self-discovery could have such a profound impact, not just on individuals, but on society as a whole.
Absolutely, and that's why her poetry continues to be relevant even centuries after her death. It's a reminder that true liberation is possible both for ourselves and for the world around us.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the Tantric underground to the concept of a contributory lineage to Lalla's role as a social reformer. So what can our listener take away from this deep dive into Lalla's world? What's that one nugget of wisdom that they can carry with them as they go about their day?
I think what strikes me the most is how her poetry, it encourages us to approach spirituality with a sense of curiosity and playfulness.
Yeah.
She's not afraid to challenge those rigid dogmas and invite us to find our own unique path to the divine.
Absolutely. I think Lalla's legacy reminds us that true liberation, it isn't like this far-off destination.
Right.
It's an ongoing journey.
Yeah.
A journey of self-discovery, questioning those beliefs that hold us back, embracing our full selves, and connecting with that spark of divinity that's within all of us. And anyone can embark on this journey, no matter their background, their beliefs, or circumstances. That's incredibly powerful. She's giving us permission to step outside those predefined boxes and explore our spirituality in a way that feels authentic to us.
Exactly. And she provides us with this guide for navigating that journey.
Yeah.
Not with strict rules,
Right.
but with courage, grace, and a good sense of humor.
Going through these sources, I felt like I was having a conversation with a wise old friend.
Oh, yeah.
Someone who's seen it all, experienced the highs and lows of life, and emerged with this incredible depth of compassion and twinkle in their eye.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it speaks to the enduring power of Lalla's words.
Yeah.
They continue to resonate with people because they offer this path towards healing, transformation, and ultimately liberation.
So after diving deep into these sources, what's that one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
I think Lalla's poetry reminds us that we don't need to be scholars or saints to experience the divine. It's not about memorizing scriptures or performing elaborate rituals. It's about tuning into that inner wisdom, that spark of truth that's already within us.
It's like she's saying the answers you seek are not out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Are right here within you.
Exactly. And that realization is incredibly empowering. It means that we all have the potential to connect with the divine, to experience that sense of wholeness and liberation.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Lalla, the mystic poet.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope her words have inspired you to embark on your own journey of self-discovery and spiritual exploration.
Definitely.
And remember, as Lalla herself might say, embrace the unknown, challenge those limitations, and don't forget to laugh along the way. Until next time, happy exploring.